Hello and welcome back. We're going to talk a little college basketball here, and it's hard to really recap and preview these games because they happen so fast. You're turning around quickly, getting a lot of games in every week. So we're going to keep it kind of broad, and we'll start out with broad picture. And I'll ask you this: who has impressed you so far in college basketball?
Um, I think I think the thing that's impressed me the most is how good the top teams are compared to everyone else. Gonzaga, Baylor, Iowa, Illinois. Um, I think that those would be my Final Four teams right now. I think the team that's impressed me the most is Baylor. Um, I watched them play against Illinois. Watched them play a couple other games against some of their lower level competition, and just the length that they have and the depth that they have is it's so impressive. It's so hard to do anything against that team with what they have. They really impressed me, and then Gonzaga too. Like I know Gonzaga is the number one ranked team, and everything, but like they have everything. Like Gonzaga and Baylor check every single box.
Mhm.
Gonzaga has a big guy inside in Timmy. They have shooting on the outside. They have depth. They have an All-American guy in Suggs who makes the world of difference when he's in there. Like you saw against West Virginia, he went down. They still are a capable team, but they're not the same team. Um, they check every box. Same thing with Baylor. So I mean, those two teams have impressed me the most, but I really like those four I mentioned earlier: Gonzaga, Baylor, Iowa, and Illinois. I think all four of those teams have a lot of strengths, and the weaknesses they do have, they cover them up really well, and their strengths can outplay their weaknesses.
Yeah, Gonzaga Baylor definitely impressed me. I'm not as impressed with Illinois. I want to see more against top tier competition. I know they played Duke, but I think it's a down year for Duke. So I want to see more from Illinois. I
Mm-hmm.
like what I've seen out of Iowa though. Their big question for me is their defense. I mean, we know they can score, but what happens when they run into a team like a Baylor who can play defense, or like a Gonzaga who's going to score almost every other possession? What happens when they run into one of those teams? So I have a little questions about them. I'll tell you a conference I've been impressed with, and that'll be the A10. I mentioned it when we did our preview, and they've impressed me even more now. You got Richmond. We know what they've done. SLU pulled off a big win against LSU. They were down two starters for that game. LSU's not the top of the SEC, but they're still up towards the top half of the SEC. So I think that was a very impressive win for them. Rhode Island, even though they've got three losses, they've played tough competition. They're going out and playing these big name programs. They're saying, "Hey, we'll play you at a moment's notice." Been impressed with them. The Bonnies, unfortunately, haven't played, but when they do, I think they'll be a very good team to watch out for as well in the A10. Dayton's looked pretty good, minus Obi Toppin, but they still look pretty good this year. I think that's a pretty deep conference, and I think they could get in maybe three teams this year. So I would like what I've seen from them. Um, Outside of that, trying to look here, who else has really impressed me? Team we talked about, and we actually bet on this game last night. The over we bet on. San Diego State. They've got two wins over probably the top two teams in the Pac-12. So maybe they're the front runner in the Pac-12 if they slide in there. Um, I like what I've seen out of them. They've played a decent schedule. They beat UCLA, beat Arizona State. It's a good team. They lose Malachi Flynn last year, but they still look really good, ready to go. They've got Mitchell, the forward, who's in his fourth year. He's another player to watch out for. Outside of that, I don't know who else has really impressed me.
I'll tell a team that's impressed me that I've watched a lot because they played our Bradley Braves is Xavier. Xavier has really impressed me. I don't understand why they're not ranked yet. They've got some pretty good wins on their resume. Beat Oklahoma the other night. Beat one at Cincinnati. I think that the Bradley win is going to at the end of the year is going to be an impressive win with what we think Bradley's supposed to be this year. Um, the conference that's really impressed me is the Big Ten. I mean, it's the best conference in basketball this year, but just seeing how deep it really is, they destroyed the ACC in the challenge. Um, I mean, you look at it and like Michigan's 5-0, but they really haven't looked great. Minnesota's 6-0, they really haven't looked great. But then you really like they're at the top of the standings because they're undefeated. But then you look at like Michigan State's up to 4 right
Mhm.
now. You have Iowa at 3, Illinois at 6, who's gonna and they're like all three of those teams are really really good. But then you also have Ohio State at 22, Rutgers who's like finally good again at basketball at 21. Wisconsin, who's been is at 13. But then you even looked at some of their unranked teams. Like Maryland had a nice win against Clemson the other night.
Mhm.
Uh, Penn State is 3-1, and beat Virginia Tech the other night by 20. Lost a bad game to Seton Hall at home where they were winning by a lot. I really like what I've seen from Indiana too. I think Indiana's a really good team. Like the
Mhm.
Big Ten is just so deep this year. And Jay Billis said it on the Duke Illinois game. He said the Big Ten is going to have teams that are going to play really, really, really good on some nights and still lose. And that's the toughest challenge for a team like Iowa, Illinois, Michigan State. How do you come back from a game where you say, man, like we played maybe our best game of the year and we lost by 5 on the road? Like,
Yeah.
how do you come back from that? Because you're going to have another game then 2 nights, 3 nights, whatever later against another really good team.
Mhm.
But just the depth of the Big Ten has really impressed me. I've really liked what I've seen out of there that conference. The other the other conference that's impressed me, and I want to segue into talking about the Missouri Valley with you because we're mid-major guys. We're Bradley basketball fans. You look at the Valley. There's one team that's yet to play a game, and that is Missouri State. There is one team that has only played one game, and that is Indiana State. Drake is 5-0, has looked pretty good. That win against Kansas State looks really, I know Kansas State's not good, lost to the Division II team the other day, but that's still a win against a Power 5 team. Um, One of the teams that I've actually kind of been impressed with is Valpo, and it's not because of their wins, but it's how they've played in their losses. They lost by 6. I know Vandy's not great, but they lost by 6 in their opening game on the road at Vandy. They lost by 7 on the road to Purdue. Like they've played well in some of these games against these bigger opponents, and I have to think like that's a big confidence boost. There's no moral victories, but that has to be a confidence boost after you lost 2 seniors and your best player last year on a team that went to the MVC championship. So like that has to be count for something. I think with that team, happy to see them there. And then I think the Valley has looked. I think some of these teams in the Valley have looked good early. What we've seen, obviously, we've only seen a handful of games from a handful of teams, but I think the Valley's is setting up to be another battle of a conference this year with the top 6 teams, 7 teams, just because it's a defensive league.
Yeah, it's been impressive. And you talked about how the teams have looked in their losses. They've played tight against good teams. I know Bradley, they've got 2 losses, but both those teams are good. South Dakota State is probably going to win the Summit, and they're probably going to win it easily. They're a good team. They beat Iowa State. Bradley also lost to Xavier, who's got the most wins in the country right now, and
Mm-hmm.
has looked pretty good. And we took them right down to the wire, missed free throw, ended the game, which you hate to see that. But M- Valley, I agree, has looked good. The one thing I would like to see, though, going forward, not just from Bradley, because this is something I want to see from Bradley, but it's also something I want to see from the whole conference in general. Win more of the games you're not supposed to, especially in non-conference.
Hmm.
Do what Drake did. Win the games you're not supposed to win. And that's the one thing I want to see more of, especially from Bradley because we're Bradley fans, but also from the whole conference to build the conference back up to where it used to be in the mid 2000s, early 2000s. Win those games that you're not supposed to win because it does wonders for their resume. And that's the one thing I want to see from the Valley. I mean, Bradley doesn't, I mean, they've got the Mizzou game. Outside of that, they don't have any games I would say they're probably going to be underdogs in until conference. Maybe Miami, Ohio, but I think Miami, Ohio is towards the bottom in the MAC. So I would like
They're
to
very
think,
good.
yeah, so I would like to think that Bradley would be favored there. So that Mizzou game's the one left that I want to see. I know Mizzou's looked pretty good so far, but if you can win a game you're not supposed to win.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's kind of always the that's kind of always the talk it is with the Valley is you got good teams that bigger schools don't want to play. So it's taking advantage of your opportunities where you get to
Mm-hmm.
play those bigger schools. Um, yeah, I think the Valley like I look at the Valley and I see teams like a team like Drake who was supposed to take a step back has looked good early. A team like Valpo, like I said, hasn't their record doesn't show how good they played in some of their games so far. They're supposed to take a step back. They could be competitive. We obviously haven't seen enough of the Indiana State or Missouri State yet, but I think the Valley's shaping up to be another good year. Obviously, AJ agreeing with you and I like that it's a big loss, but they hung with Richmond the other night on the road without him. So,
Yeah,
um,
I
but
think.
I go
Sorry,
ahead.
but I think the AJ Green loss is obviously big, but sometimes when you lose your best player, it opens up the floor more because you don't know where the scoring is going to come from. So it does suck. And I think I'm not saying they're better without him, but it could help them in terms of spacing the floor and scoring because they do still have some really good shooters, some really good players on that team without him. I think they're not somebody to write off right now. I know they're 1-4, but I wouldn't write them off just quite yet. Another team that we haven't mentioned yet is actually a team currently playing, and they're currently playing against Murray State, and that's Southern Illinois. I like this team because they play really good defense and they buy into what the coach is doing there.
Yeah, and you're talking about a team who their two best players last year outside of Cook and being a senior, Lance Jones and Marcus Dumas, both back, both had good years last year, exceeded expectations, made it. You know, won a game down in St. Louis, or no, sorry, played a competitive game down in St. Louis last year against Bradley.
Mm.
Um, yeah, they're a team that I think is gonna be a tough matchup for every team in the conference this year. Um, I going back to you and I real quick. I think it's just going to show how good of a coach Ben Jacobson is. I've had a lot of respect for him for a lot of years. I knew about him and I had a lot of respect for him before I came to Bradley and got involved with the Valley because he coached at UNI. Iowa State plays UNI every other year. He's always been a good coach. He's always been someone that I think gets the most out of his players, and I think it's going to be interesting to see the kind of team that they have this year without AJ Green if they change what they do. Because right now, a lot of their offense is high pick and rolls with AJ Green, space the floor with shooters, let him do pretty much everything. Now it's going to be more, we got to drum up some offense by cutting and moving and freeing up shooters off screens and pick and rolls and stuff like that without AJ doing everything. So I think you and I still going to find ways to be very competitive in a lot of their games. And I think it's just going to show how good of a coach he is. But
Yeah, I agree with you there. I grew up in St. Louis, obviously, so I grew up going to the Valley tournament games. And UNI is always a team. It doesn't matter how good they're supposed to be. It seems like they always win a game down in St. Louis. They're always winning at least one game.
um, I want to get in. I don't have a lot of anything else for college basketball. I don't know.
I've got I've got one question, and this is something I would like to see, but I don't know if it will happen. And that this question is, could we see randomly scheduled games pop up like we saw in college football with the Coastal Carolina BYU? I know with Baylor Gonzaga, they said they're going to play it at a later date. Could that just pop up randomly and they're like, hey, we've got a free spot here. Okay, we do too. Let's play. Could that happen? I don't know, but personally, if these games that are getting canceled right now, if they could reschedule them, especially the bigger games to help build your resume in the non-conference, that'd be nice, especially if it works out, geographically. Somebody like in Illinois needs a game. Hey, we got a game canceled. Hey, Bradley, come play us. That would be nice. I would like to see that. I know it's a hypothetical and it's not really a for sure thing, but that's something I would like to see because we saw what happened in the Coastal Carolina BYU situation. BYU was a team that everybody's like, oh, throw 10. They're favored by 10 points. They're the better team. Coastal Carolina came out, they beat them, and they proved, hey, no, they're actually not the better team. We are. It's just something I would
I
like to see
I
them
would
consider.
I would like to see it too. The problem is I think you're running out of time to do it because you're starting conference play here in a
Well,
few weeks,
but
and
but
I,
if conference, here's the thing though, if conference games get canceled, are you just what if you need a game? What if you're running out of time and it's like, okay, we can't do the conference game. Let's get a non-conference game with somebody that fits us geographically.
I think teams are going to look into that, especially if like you're looking at a couple of these conferences have rules of you're basically if you have a COVID problem, teams are basically out for 2 weeks. So I think you could see that where you have schools who say, hang on, we're supposed to play this school next Saturday and they're canceled. They're canceled for 2 weeks. That's gonna like 2 weeks of college basketball. It basically affects like 10 teams
Mhm.
because one team basically has to cancel 4 games. You have all four of those opponents who are now canceling games and then or having to cancel that game, and then you have all four of those teams that they're supposed to be playing in the next few days. Back and forth. Like it affects a lot when you cancel a game. So I think you could. The problem will be is take a team like Bradley for example, and Illinois. Middle of January, Bradley has an open Saturday because the game got canceled. Like, is there any point in Illinois scheduling them when they can get by on just playing in the Big Ten? I think it's going to come down to more like can Bradley gets a free weekend? Can they schedule maybe a DePaul or a Northern Illinois,
Or
a
Northwestern.
closer team who has more to gain and less to
Yeah.
lose by playing Bradley? But I do think it's a possibility for sure because I think teams are going to be looking for those games because there are going to be quite a few open weekends, and it's easy for Bradley to get on a bus and drive 2 hours north to DeKalb to play Northern Illinois. Um, the problem is I think as you get into conference play, I think teams are going to be. I think you're going to see less cancellations with games in conference play, and also I think like we've already seen the Valley come out and change their schedule, change logistics of it. I think that might also be what we see more of. Like you look at a conference like the Pac-12 does a lot of traveling. Um, Maybe we see something change there where it's, hey, instead of going to Arizona and playing Arizona and Arizona State 2 days, 2 games in 3 days, you play those 2 games and then you go to UCLA and you play UCLA and US. Like it's just maybe it's like you play 4 games in 7 days, but you're getting those games played, and then you have a week off, and it's more games, less travel kind of thing. Um, so I don't know. I like where your head's at. I'd love to see stuff like that, but I think it's going to be hard now that we're in a conference play. The season started when it was supposed to, and we had all of November and all of December to do things like that. I think absolutely we would see it more.
Well, and the thing too, though, that I keep in the back of my head is I think I mean, you're going to have cancellations and stuff like
Right.
that. And let's say a team that didn't really play a lot of non-conference games, but they're starting to do well in conference. They're trying to build their resume more. Let's say, off the top of my head, let's think here, like a Northwestern. Let's. I mean, this is hypothetical. Northwestern. They don't play a lot of non-conference games. They haven't played very many so far. Don't know how many more they have scheduled. But they get into conference play. They're doing well, building things. You get down to February where there's not much time left between there and the conference tournament. You get games canceled, and it's like, okay, we could either not play games or we could go out and schedule a good
Right.
mid-major that's also doing well, that could help our resume and could also help their resume.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see. I would love to see it, but it's just I think maybe later in the year, if a team like Northwestern is really searching for more games outside the Big Ten. But I think for some of these bigger conference schools that don't need to play more games outside of their regular conference schedule are going to look at a free Saturday and say, do we want to schedule another game and go that route, or do we want to just take a Saturday off, let our guys rest, and then get back to it on Tuesday or Wednesday? Because like I look at like Iowa State, for example. Like they don't need games. They don't need games against Drake in Northern Iowa, or maybe even like a Nebraska, Minnesota, like geographically close games to help. Because if they do well in the Big 12, they're going to make the NCAA tournament. Like obviously, like a school like that, a Power 5 school like that doesn't need more help than what their conference gives them. But when you look at mid majors, I think it's more possible with mid majors, and I think it might be more like across the board. Like maybe like Bradley picks up a game with like like I said, a DePaul or Northern Illinois, but then maybe they pick up a game with like a Belmont or a Murray State down, close in Kentucky, or a SEMO or a team like that, where that's just more in need of just needing to play games to help themselves out.
Yeah, it's just something I think could be interesting and would be interesting to see.
There is last thing I wanted to talk to you about. The so I was an official at Bradley in campus recreation. You're a smart guy in sports. Why are there so many charges called in college basketball? I don't know if you watched the Illinois Duke game the other night, but Jay Billis was beside himself. Every time a guy hit the ground, a defender hit the ground, and an offensive player initiated a little bit of contact, it was a charge. Now I get when an offensive player is going up for a layup and he clearly jumps 3 feet to the left to make contact and then go up for the layup. That should not be a foul. That is an offensive player going out of his way to draw contact and try and get an and one. But when you're also an offensive player and you're going up for a layup and a defensive player slides over and then starts falling back, like that is a block 100% of the time. And they call it the hardest call in basketball. In college basketball, it's really not. Like college basketball, you watch it in real time, you're like, that is 100% a block. But they call it a charge because the defensive guy made an effort to get there and try and take one. And then and Billis said it best. He said, college basketball, college officials, everyone in college basketball wants flopping out of the game. And then you reward a defensive player for flopping by giving him a charge and giving them the ball. And you went on your rant earlier about rankings, and this is kind of my rant, is as a former official, as someone who's done reffing, as someone who enjoys college basketball a lot, I think that that is something that is really, really getting to me this year, because I've really started to notice that people are talking about it, is it's getting real. Like, there was like a stretch there, I think they called 5 charges in like 7 minutes, and maybe one of them was charges. And it's so painful to watch, because you're rewarding players for taking a little bit of contact and falling down and selling it. And that is not that's not basketball.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, you have to be set in order to have a charge, right?
You don't have to be in the typical what's thought of as a block charge call. Yes, you have to be set, and you also have to be at that spot before the offensive player jumps in the air. If the offensive player jumps in the air, you can't come set and let him fall on you. But one thing that they have been enforcing is you're seeing offensive fouls called on people driving. And what that is the offensive player and the defensive player are both trying to get to point B. The defensive player gets there first, and he may not be set, but he got to this spot before the offensive player got there, and the offensive player tried going through him. That should be called as a charge, because the defensive player has a right to the left elbow as much as the offensive player does. And if the defensive player guy gets there first, shows his hands, moves his feet, and gets knocked down, even if he is moving, that is still an offensive foul. The problem is that officials are seeing a defensive player at the last second slide over and try and draw contact and then fall down, and they're rewarding that. And they may be there first, but if you're still sliding and trying to draw that contact, that's not a charge. I'd would love to see more no calls. I would love to see, if when there's even just a little bit of contact and both guys fall down, don't call anything, because neither player, the offensive player went out of his way to draw the contact. The defensive player went out of his way to draw the contact. Neither one needed to do that. The offensive player could have avoided him to make the shot. The defensive player could have walled straight up, gone straight up, or just tried to deflect the ball. There needs to be more no calls.
Yeah, and that's kind of a thing where if there's question on what it should be a block charge, don't call it. Just let it go. Let the game continue to go on. And I know what you're saying. It starts to take away from the game, because you're trying to ticky tack all this. It's like all these little minor things that you're calling, and it takes away from the game, takes away from the flow of the game.
Because then you start to reward defensive players for taking a little bit of contact and then falling down, and then you start to scare offensive players. Offensive players are going to say, I can't drive in the lane, because as soon as I use my arm, not push off, as soon as I use my arm to just shield the ball, shield the defender, or I go in and I kind of lean in with my shoulder to protect the ball, I'm going to get called for a charge. And then you start to get more of an ugly game. Then you start to get more threes thrown up there. Then you start to get less dribble penetration and more 1-2 dribble pass. It just creates for an uglier game, because you make the game soft in that.
Another thing too is they're calling more hand fouls when players are driving in recent years. They're calling more of that. So it might be a correction for that rule, where they're a little more ticky-tack on the defenders. Hey, don't reach your hands in and stuff like that. And it might be that. Is it right? No. But it might be a correction for what they did with defenders, limiting how they can defend.
Right. And I think one of the things also on that is when defenders wall up, you go straight up, but you jump from point A to point B, that's a foul, because you're not going vertical. But when players go straight up and then take a knee or an elbow in the chest and come down, or they go straight up and the ball's, the offensive player's laying it up with his hands and the defensive player's trying to hit at it, they call that a foul. Those are another thing of calls where they need to just let go more. when the defensive player makes a really good effort and goes straight up but can't keep his arms straight up in the air because he takes he takes his shoulder in the chest, like that's another call where it's like they're overcorrecting
Mm,
for that because like it just makes for bad basketball. And I think sometimes they bail out the offense. Like it's the same thing in the NFL, college football. Like they bail out the offensive player, they bail out the quarterback more, they bail out the wide receiver. Like it's the same thing you're seeing here. They're bailing out a guy who gets to the lane, drives, and like half the time you watch these college basketball players, they're out of control. Like they're going up for a layup and they're just throwing themselves at the defensive player and just trying to chuck something up to get the that should not be rewarded. And it's the same thing with a charge. A defensive player should not be rewarded by just throwing themselves in front of the guy and taking a charge. And I don't know. It's gotten to me. I just want to throw it out there. I'm not a
yeah.
fan of it. I'm someone that like when I refed, I enjoyed swallowing my whistle more. I enjoyed letting people play. If a couple bodies hit the floor, if a couple uh, bodies hit each other, I let those go because I'm saying like two people going after the ball and hitting each other should not be a foul on one
Hmm.
person. Both are
Yeah.
going after the ball. Both are trying to make a play on the ball. They just ran into each other. That's not a foul.
Yeah.
And that's just the kind of ref I was when I ref great DU League basketball. So, I don't know. It's bugging to me, and I think people are starting to pick up on there's some really bad officiating in the NCAA right now.
Yeah. I mean, officiating across like leagues, it doesn't really matter what sport you look at. It seems like they're trying to do too much. They're trying to implement too many rules when sometimes it's like, hey, step back, let them play. And I see that not only in basketball, but a variety of different sports. So I know what you're saying. They're trying to implement too much. So with that being said, I think we should talk about some games we're looking forward to this next half week, starting tomorrow into Wednesday, we'll say. And the first game, or I've actually got, I think Saturdays and for college basketball this week is better than the football slate.
Mm-hmm.
You've got Florida at Florida State. That's going to be a pretty good game. Two rivals going at it there. Notre Dame at Kentucky, I think could be a good game. I think Notre Dame's a decent team. They're not great. Kentucky's looking to bounce back, obviously. And then the last game I'll talk about or I've got one more after this one, but I'll let you speak. I've got Illinois at Mizzou is the last one I'll say before I let you speak. I think that could be a good game. I think it could be an interesting game. Bragging rights. They play this game every year. And basketball, Mizzou's done a decent amount of recruiting in Illinois since they've gotten their new coach. They've got a kid from Simeon. They've got another kid from East St. Louis. So they do a decent amount of recruiting. So these guys are pretty familiar with each other.
Yeah, the Illinois Missouri game I'm really looking forward to watching. I've enjoyed watching Illinois. I'm not a huge Illinois fan, but I'm glad to see them kind of get back to the national level that they've been at. 10 years ago, maybe a little longer. Cincinnati at Tennessee. I think Tennessee's a really, really good team. I'm excited to see that game because I think Cincinnati's still a little underrated. I think they're still figuring it out a little bit. And then an underrated game, I think potentially just because of, I guess you could say like what it could potentially be if that these two teams start to figure it out is Memphis at Auburn. We know Memphis, Penny Hardaway, they had James Wiseman last year. They still have some talent on that team. They've recruited well the last few years. And then Auburn, like Auburn's still a decent team. Like they lost to Gonzaga but like I think that game, like if both these teams play as well as like their ceiling is, like it could be an interesting game. So I'm excited to watch that game. I think that game could be could get interesting. And then Sunday, there's
One second. I've got one under the radar game for
okay,
Saturday
yeah,
that I think might be decent, and that's a battle in North Carolina. North Carolina Central at UNC. North Carolina Central is a mid-major program that is
hmm
really pretty done some really nice things. And I think the name to watch isn't on the court. I think it's the head coach for North Carolina Central because I think he's bound to get a big job here soon, and that's Lavelle Morton. He's done a lot of good things with that program, and I think soon he will be making his way to a better mid-major or Power Five potentially.
yeah, that's an interesting game. I like what I've seen from North Carolina this year too. They got some great big men. Sunday slate I think is loaded with some great games. First, Richmond at West Virginia. Richmond's looked good this year. They already beat Kentucky. West Virginia's been a little up and down, but I think that's going to be a really good game. And then the game I'm really, really looking forward to, it's at 2 p.m., so it's going to be tough to watch right as some of the NFL games are starting to wind down. But Texas at Baylor. We talked earlier, we both really, really like Baylor. Texas has looked pretty good at times. They won the Maui Invitational. They beat some good teams there. Um, I think that game's gonna be really good. I think Baylor's gonna win and look like the number 2 team in the country at times, but I think Texas is gonna kind of show people on this national stage that another game on national TV that shows that they're a good team this year. Um, so I'm really looking forward to those games. And then an under the radar game for me on Sunday is Stanford at USC. Stanford has looked uh, really competitive at times this year. Not really known as a basketball school, but they've looked good this year. They got a 5-star recruit, which anytime you can get a 5-star recruit at a team like Stanford who doesn't normally get them. Those are always great for that program. Great to see. And then USC, same thing. 5-star recruit in Moberly, team that it could be a game where it just could get really competitive, really close. You got 2 teams that are kind of trying to find their way in the Pac-12. You know, Pac-12 was wide open this year. Arizona State has looked shaky. UCLA has looked shaky. Both these teams, I think, have some good players to potentially compete. So I can't wait to watch that game as well.
Yeah, you kind of hit on most of the games I want to talk about for Sunday. I agree with you with the Texas part. They've got some really good athletes on that team this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then Matt Coleman at point guard I've watched a lot of Texas so far, and he's really impressed me. And I think Texas is a team to watch out for no matter who they play. Another under the radar game I'll give you, though, for Sunday is Penn State at Michigan. These are 2 middle tier Big Ten programs that could potentially push their way towards the top. But I think these are 2 teams that could be bubble teams and are pretty good teams. They're not at the top of the Big Ten, like I said, but they're still something to look out for. They're still a tough out no matter who they play. So I think that could be a very interesting game.
Yeah, there's a lot of good games coming up in the next few days, and I think obviously Gonzaga has their COVID stuff, so they're kind of shut down right now. But I think we're going to learn about teams like Illinois and even more. Just see them more. To see teams like Baylor play some high level competition some more. Like hey, we're just going to keep seeing a lot of these teams that are kind of starting to separate themselves. Just see them play some more schools that are ranked higher, and I'm excited for it. I think there's some really good teams this year in college basketball. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I think the game I'm most looking forward to is Illinois Missouri. That's become a real good rivalry over the last few years. Just some really close games. So I'm really looking forward to that one. And Bradley doesn't get back on the court for another week, but obviously when they get back on the court, we'll hopefully be able to break down that game a little bit.
Yeah, I agree with you with the Mizzou, Illinois. Being from Missouri, I've got family that usually goes to that game every year. Usually got tickets down in sometimes it's at the Enterprise, sometimes it's at Chaffetz, but usually it draws a pretty big crowd. And like I said, Mizzou's starting to recruit over in Illinois and starting to take some of the, not necessarily take Illinois' prospects, but taking kids from the Illinois area. So I think these teams know each other and it should be a good one. I do really like that Texas Baylor game. Think it'll be a really good game as well. Um, that's all I've got though.
Yeah, it's gonna be a fun weekend. I think not a great college football slate, but I think the college basketball will help make up for it on Saturday.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter from _knows. Thank you for tuning in and see you next time.